Assalamu alaikum. So I want to discuss with you this ayah in Surah Ali Imran, which is ayah 7, so chapter 3, verse 7. But before I do, I want to address the fact that I'm having this class or this video or this talk in a car. And so what I want to say is that knowledge is not location specific. In fact, the Quran tells us, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. And to Allah belongs the east and the west, so wherever you turn, there is the face of Allah. So we shouldn't limit knowledge, education, learning, studying to any particular location and even to any particular person. Because a lot of people get caught up on all the trappings. They get caught up on the look, the location, the symbols of authority, all that type of stuff. But none of that has to do with actual real knowledge. So with that said, let's look at this verse. So first let me read the verse. So the verse says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ منه آيات محكمات هن الكتاب وأخر متشابهات, which means he is the one who sent down upon you the book. From it are aayaat muhkamaat, are ayat. So ayat can mean signs, lessons. Sometimes it's translated as verses. So from it are ayat muhkamaat. So muhkamaat is one of the words that I want to go a little bit deeper about. So minhu ayatun muhkamatun hunna kitab. They are the mother of the book. Wa ukharu mutashaabihaat, and others that are mutashaabihaat. And this is another word that we need to discuss a little bit more in detail. So first, in the first part of this verse, this question comes up because he's telling us that al-kitab, the book, has ayat, which could be signs, lessons, or verses that are of two different natures, muhkamaat and mutashaabihaat. Then the verse continues, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْ. And as for those in whose hearts is deviation, they follow what is tashabaha from the book. They follow what is connected to the mutashaabihat. ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله, seeking al-fitna, trials, tests, etc. وابتغاء تأويله, and seeking its ta'wil. Ta'wil sometimes is explained as seeking its interpretation, but ta'wil can have other dimensions. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, but none knows its ta'wil except Allah. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ, and those firmly grounded in knowledge say, we believe in it. آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا, all of it is from our Lord. وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ, and none remembers except for the people of intellect. So this verse is a very interesting verse that has a lot of different potential explanations, because people have given different reasons why there's two types of ayat in the verse and what this means to say that there are ayatul muhkamat and they are the mother of the book, and others that are mutashaabihat. But in this video I want to give you a slightly different explanation for this, which will help us apply this explanation to other cases. So from studying this verse in the context, I personally believe that this verse in the first instance is referring to the story of Jesus. And I say in the first instance because every verse in the Quran or every concept in the Quran should be universal and applicable to a wide range of cases. So even if we can look at the context and say it applies to something in the context, but that doesn't mean we only limit it to that. However, understanding the context does help us understand the larger implications of the verse. And I think also helps us weed through the different explanations that are given. So why do I say this verse in the first instance refers to Jesus? Well, first we have to look at where this verse occurs at. This verse occurs in chapter 3, verse 7. So what's before it and what's after it? What comes in some of the later verses of Surah Ali Imran? What are some of the themes of this surah? So the verse that immediately precedes this, which is verse 6, it says, هُوَ الَّذِي يُصَوِّرُكُمْ فِي الْأَرْحَامِ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ, that he is the one who shapes you in the wombs however he wills. There is no God but he, Al-Aziz Al-Hakim, the mighty and the wise. Now, what does shaping you in the wombs have to do with the next verse, which is the sending of the book and having different kind of ayat? So when you read these ayat together, هُوَ الَّذِي يُصَوِّرُكُمْ فِي الْأَرْحَامِ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب. Right? What's the connection between those two things? He is the one who shapes you in the wombs, and then he says, he is the one who sent down upon you the book. So I think this is our first indication that this verse is referring to the birth, the life, and the death of Jesus. That he connects the sending down upon you of the book with these different kind of ayats to shaping you in the wombs. What further supports that is if you go to verse 33. So not too many verses later, verse 33 is going to begin the discussion of the family of Jesus, right? Which is called Ali Imran. Inna Allah astafa Adam wa Nuhan wa ala Ibrahim wa ala Imran ala al-alamin, in verse 33. That Allah chose Adam and Noah and the family of Ibrahim and the family of Imran over all of the worlds. And the family of Imran is where the lineage of Jesus, where Jesus came from. And shortly thereafter, a couple verses later, that's when we find the grandmother of Jesus, who's the mother of Mary, saying, نَظَرْتُ لَكَ مَا فِي بَطْنِي مُحَرَّرًا فَتَقَبَّلْ مِنِّي, telling Allah that I vowed to you what is in my batn, what is within me, in my stomach, in my womb, to be free. So talking about Mary. And she says, فَتَقَبَّلْ مِنِّي, so accept from me. And then we find the birth of Mary talked about. And then if we keep reading, we find the discussion of Mary being given glad tidings of the birth of Jesus. All of this is in chapter 3, starting at verse 33, somewhere to around, I think, verse 62. Now, another connection that shows us that this verse 3:7 is primarily talking about Jesus and Jesus' story is in chapter 4. So how we see this connection is through the term الراسخون في العلم, or those firmly grounded in knowledge. So recall in chapter 3, verse 7, the verse that we're studying, towards the end of the verse, it says, وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ, that those firmly grounded in knowledge say, we have believed in it, كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا, all of it is from our Lord. Now, when we go to chapter 4, this is the only other place that the term الرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, those firmly grounded in knowledge, occurs in the whole Quran. And right before it is the discussion of Jesus and how they thought that they killed and crucified him. And this is all in chapter 4. So in that place, when they discuss this, when the Quran tells us about what they thought they did, it says, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, that they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. وَلَكِنْ, however, shubbiha lahum, shubbiha. Roughly, so this word shubbiha is related linguistically in the root to the word mutashaabihaat. They come from the same root. And this is the word that we find in Surah 3, verse 7. And this is explained in different ways. Shubbiha lahum, it was made similar to them, right? Is one way to think about it, right? So some people explain this as saying, that Allah put the appearance of Jesus on another person. Personally, I think the simplest explanation is the best, using Occam's razor. I think that they may have thought that they killed him. They may have even took him through the process of trying to crucify him and thinking that he was dead, but he really wasn't dead. Allah saved him. And to me, this is a lot simpler way to think about shubbiha, right? Meaning it was made to appear to them, or made to seem similar to them, or was made to resemble. But the main point I want to make here is, if you look on this page in Surah An-Nisa, when he says shubbiha lahum, when he uses this same root word about the supposed crucifixion of Jesus, on that same page, if you read later, a few verses later, he uses the term ar-rasikhuna fil ilm, those firmly grounded in knowledge. This is the only other place in the Quran that it's used. Here and in chapter 3, verse 7, when he says there are different kind of ayats, and the other kind, ukharu mutashaabihaat, are mutashaabihaat, and then he references ar-rasikhuna fil ilm, those firmly grounded in knowledge. So is that a coincidence that the only two places that this term ar-rasikhuna fil ilm is used is in 3:7, which references mutashaabihaat, And later in that same chapter, not too far later, by the way, is a long discussion of Jesus' grandmother, mother, and Jesus' story. And then the only other place is in chapter 4, where right before it is the story of Jesus, and the same root word is used, shubbiha. I don't think those things are a coincidence, and when you put them all together, I think that's a very strong argument that chapter 3, verse 7 initially, primarily, is referring to the story of Jesus. So now let's tie it all together. Like, how does that help us understand this verse? So he says, minhu ayatun muhkamatun hunna ummul kitab. From it are ayat that are muhkamat, and they are the mother of the book. What are ayatun muhkamat? So I would say, based on what we've discussed, these things are the basic principles that everything else is based on, and that for the most part we can all agree on. Like, for example, with Jesus, the Quran says, kana ya'kulani at-ta'am, about him and his mother, that they both used to eat food. This is a basic principle of a human being that we can all agree upon. Now, where we begin to disagree is in the other things that he did, and some people will interpret that as meaning he was divine or he was God, etc. And these would be the mutashaabihaat. So that's perhaps why he says after that, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ, as for those in whose hearts is a deviation, فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْ, they follow what is tashabaha of it. They follow all of the details that aren't as clear and are open to a lot of different possibilities. That's what they follow, instead of the muhkamaat, the basic principles that we can all agree upon. So the muhkamaat are the basic principles, and the mutashaabihaat are the details. Another place that would support this interpretation is chapter 11, verse 1. In that place he says, kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu. So he uses the same root word, or a variation of the same root word, as muhkamat. Kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu, a book which its ayat have been uhkimat, they've been made muhkam or muhkamat. And from the root of this is hakama, the three-letter root word, ha, kaf, and mim. And hakama in its root means to prevent. So uhkimat ayatuhu, they've been made solid and perfected in a way that they prevent any possible misunderstanding, because these are basic principles. But then the verse continues, kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu thumma fussilat, a book whose ayat have been uhkimat, been perfected, made muhkamat, thumma fussilat, then they have been detailed. So notice the detailing of the ayat comes after making them muhkamat. So we can put that all together to say, potentially, perhaps, that ayatul muhkamat are the basic principles, wa ukharu mutashaabihaat, and others that are mutashaabihaat are the many different details that derive from that. And the details are where the confusion, misunderstanding, and all the different possible interpretations come about. So we have to always go back to the muhkamat, which are the basic principles. And that's what happened in Jesus' life, because Jesus did things that made people feel like he was God or the Son of God, right? But what are the basic principles that we can go back to? And now applying that to our lives, what are some of the basic principles in the Quran? For example, when Allah tells us to do hukm between people, he uses words like haqq, right? Truth. When he tells us what he orders, he says, Inna Allaha ya'murukum bil adli, Allah orders you with justice, right? So some of the basic principles are like justice, haqq, etc. Or qist, which is another form of justice. And so perhaps the ayatun muhkamat are the basic principles of truth, justice, compassion, mercy, etc. And the mutashaabihaat are all the different details that we can come across in being a Muslim. And so sometimes we have disputes about these details, and what we need to do is go back to the principles of truth and justice and mercy and all of these different principles that are muhkamat, that we as human beings can agree upon, and then interpret the details in light of those principles, because they are ummul kitab. They are the mother of the book, the essence, the thing that gives birth to everything else. And Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.